Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. I'm Chuck Mason, and with me today is my co-host Janelle Blue. Janelle is president of the Mount Vernon Genealogical Society, that is our sponsor, and our guest today is Linda MacLachlan. Linda is also a past president of the Mount Vernon Society, like I am. Welcome, Linda. And before we get started, we want to do a quick plug for the Federation of Genealogical Societies Conference, which is coming up August the 21st to the 24th at the Omni Showroom downtown. And if you just go to fgs.org, you can find all the information. We have the homepage showing there for the conference, but all the information for the conference. It's going to be 4 days of genealogical lectures. So, Linda, most of us are curious about our ancestors, but we have often busy lives, no time to tackle things and all, and it can often be an overwhelming task. But, you began your research for researching your husband's family while you were a practicing attorney in St. Louis, which I didn't know it was St. Louis. I knew it was the Midwest. So since you became president of Mount Vernon in 2000, you've been a lecturer, an author, and become an expertise on New England research. So what inspired you to begin the genealogy research?
Okay, well, as you say, it began when I was a practicing attorney in St. Louis. And my mother-in-law, who was a delightful woman, appeared at my doorstep one day with this big cardboard carton. And she said, "Linda, you need to do something for me. Help me with this stuff." And she hands me this big box that is full of all sorts of documents. It was just absolutely incredible what was in it. There was a notebook that her father had created that had newspaper clippings and correspondence going back 100 yeed for his carrier family. And there was a book that was written by her mother's father where he'd transcribed his father's diaries over over tens of years. And there was a tremendous collection of other things too. There was even a Revolutionary War pension application, would you believe?
Gosh.
I was very surprised by that because I thought you have to send it off to the government in order to get a pension. But apparently what people did in those days was they made themselves a handwritten duplicate. Okay. I mean, you couldn't Xerox it, so you made more than one copy. So it's a duplicate original that I have of somebody's, of Jabez Flint's pension application for the Revolutionary War. And I have a calligraphy sample from his wife when she was a little girl practicing her handwriting. There was all sorts of documents in there, and lots of pedigree charts and family group sheets showing how these people were all related to my husband.
I know over time, a lot of those Revolutionary War pension files were lost. Were you able to find it? Did you ever go down to the archives to see if his is one that survived and compare them?
Oh yes, his is online now, and the lines, and he didn't copy it exactly the same way both times. Each line ends up in a different place, but it's the same handwriting.
Yeah, same information.
Yes, obviously the same information.
So I think about the time you probably started, we had things like Ancestry and Family Search.
Not yet. Oh,
Not
no.
yet? Okay.
Oh no.
So then when
this was in the 90s.
Okay.
It was before. It was when they were talking about inventing IBM computers. There wasn't even an IBM PC then. We bought a Commodore. Okay. was a brand of computer, and they had a genealogy program that I bought the first one to ever hold 500 people, which seemed like a lot back then.
It's an antique now.
So then where and how did you begin? You know, you have all this stuff.
That is right. I
What
have
do you
all
do
this
with
stuff.
it?
And you know, most people would just take that box and say, "This is overwhelming. I'm going to put it aside," and then nothing ever happens. So, what did you start with?
Well, the first thing I started with was putting together the pedigree chart so I would know how all these people are related to my
Smart.
husband.
Very smart.
So I started working with the secondary documents. My husband's family has had genealogists in it for centuries. Not only my mother-in-law's father and her mother's father, but on her husband's side, his grandmother and his other grandmother's father, and going all the way back to 1660 is the earliest genealogist in the family. I mean,
Golly.
there's always been somebody in one line or another keeping the records. It was incredible how much that family had put together already. And so what I was trying to do is put it all together in how they're related to my husband and my children. And so that's where I started. And I would go take each one back to the immigrant ancestor to the beginning of America. And as I did that, I kept wondering what made these people come to America. And I decided that would really be my goal, was to find all the immigrant ancestors of my husband and why they made the move.
Did you find that out?
I have my genealogy program, and they're much bigger nowadays than 500. I have found over 6,000 direct American ancestors of my husband.
Wow.
So
Well,
you've done your husband. What about yours?
Well,
Is that one of the lines that's sitting out there to be done?
just in the last few years, I've gotten brave enough to do mine. The advantage of my husband's is that it was all in English.
good point.
My family only goes back a couple of generations in English, and then my father's side becomes German and my mother's side becomes Hungarian. And I didn't know those languages, and so I was very reluctant to do my own genealogy.
So on your husband's side, did you find some interesting things? Everybody always wants to, find somebody famous or something that is interesting.
I found all sorts of interesting things.
Yeah?
Yes. Oh, yeah. As I say, my mother-in-law was a carrier by birth, and there was a carrier. Her sixth great-grandmother, as a matter of fact, was hung as a witch at Salem.
Oh my gosh.
And she knew that going in. And so we studied all the books about the witches at Salem and what happened to them and why she was picked on and what happened to her and what happened to her family afterward. So we did a lot of research on that. And we found some really surprising things. Such as at the point when she was one of the last batch of witches that was hung in August of 1692. There were no more witches hung after that. And her case was considered by the Reverend Cotton Mather, who was the minister who was really pushing the witchcraft
It's a familiar
trials.
name, yeah.
Her case was considered the best case for proving the value of spectral evidence, which is what the Salem witchcraft trials were all about.
What is spectral evidence?
A spectral evidence is evidence, people testifying about specters, ghosts, devils who actually met them and talked to them.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, not the evidence we have in trials nowadays. But that's what they were all about. They all believed in the devil. Everybody did.
Yeah.
And so it was a natural extension of that to believe in the devil recruiting people.
I see.
But having it come up in court as evidence hadn't happened before.
Was she the last one that was?
And I think it was partly because of what happened as a result of her trial. During her incarceration, another man who had been accused of witchcraft was imprisoned in the same jail as her children. When a woman was imprisoned for witchcraft, was jailed, her children would be too. I mean, what else happens to them, right?
My goodness.
And he was a witness in his prison to her children being tortured. Her children, the reason her case was considered such a strong case was because her 16-year-old son and her 12-year-old daughter both testified that she had turned them into witches and commanded them to go out and harass specific people, which was considered very strong evidence. But the question is, why did they do that? And what this man wrote in a letter to the governor was that he witnessed these children being tortured. They took a noose around their neck and attached it down their back to their heels, and they left them that way.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I was
that's
dumbfounded.
so cruel.
It is, but it obviously worked.
Yeah. Well, that's understandable.
And it really made us think a lot about how these kids grew up with that, knowing what had happened. It must have been awful. But anyway, the effect was that within a few months, the governor declared an end to it. Now, most of the books say that the governor ended the trials because his wife was accused, and I'm sure that had a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
But I suspect this case had something to do with it, too.
Oh my gosh, how interesting. How lucky you were to have so much information and then to have such interesting things going on, even though I'm very sad for that family.
Yes.
So whether you're a new or an experienced researcher, we're always trying to find the answer. And sometimes we just have that aha moment, something that it finally clicks with you. One of the ones that I had was doing work down at the National Archives, and what I was looking at for a man was the fort reports. All of the forts around the country had to send in a monthly report of all their activities, the military forts, and they had to send in these reports. Well, they were all folded up because they were large pieces of paper and wrapped up in red tape, which is really a red like seam binding that it loses its color, it turns pink or it turns white. But some of these I was opening and I was realizing I'm the first person who has looked at these in who knows how many years because of the way the bows were done, where others, I'm opening them and it's obvious somebody else has looked through them. So that was an aha moment for me, that I'm the first one to look at these in maybe 100 years, I don't know. Do you have one of those?
Oh, yes. And as a matter of fact, I wrote it up and I put it in the Mount Vernon Genealogical Society newsletter about 5 years ago when I discovered it. I was studying the court trial of an ancestor of my husband's who was arrested for counterfeiting an $80 bill in 1786.
I didn't know there was such a thing.
I didn't either. But there in the archives at the Connecticut State Library, I actually found the $80 bill. It was inside of his arrest warrant. I found his arrest warrant, and the $80 bill was inside of it. They had taken the bill and they'd cut it into a circle so that nobody could use it again. So it was a circle of the $80 bill, but it really was an $80 bill.
Oh my gosh.
And I held it in my hands.
and you wouldn't think that there would be money that much in one bill at that time, because things were relatively inexpensive, not for the times, but when we think about it today, $80 bill today, $100 bill today would be nothing for people to carry around.
Yes, he got the $80 bill. He testified for selling his indigo crop for the year. So it was his proceeds from his whole farm.
And did somebody give him, is he saying that somebody gave him the bill?
Yes, somebody
so
gave
he
him
was
the bill.
innocent.
And he decided before he went home that he would buy his wife a new set of wooden dishes. And so he took the bill into a shop where he bought the dishes and then carried them and the change home with him. And by the time he got home, the shopkeeper was on his doorstep saying, "This bill's no good."
Oh my gosh! Now, how did you? Where did you locate that information?
In the Connecticut State Library, they actually have the records of the trial.
And did you know that, or how did you find out that that was there? Was it in online or in their card catalog, or
It was in their card catalog.
Wow.
I mean, I could see that there was a trial, and I didn't know what it was about until I actually looked at the documents.
That was an aha
Because
moment.
I hadn't heard about it before at all.
Oh my gosh.
And was he actually found guilty? And
That's a very interesting story. What happened was the day he was supposed to be arrested, apparently he got wind of what was going to happen, and he wrote a petition to the legislature of Connecticut that laid out the whole story. Now you got to remember when this is. This is after America has won the revolution, but before there's a constitution.
Oh.
It's during that in-between
time.
period when there is no currency.
Oh.
There's no legal, the United States doesn't yet have permission to make its own bills. So there's all sorts of currency floating around. And it was during that period that this occurred, and he got wind of it, and he sent this petition to the legislature to try to explain himself away. What happened was he was afraid, people convinced him that somebody in Hartford was out to get him, and they would convict him if he showed up at the trial, so he didn't show up. And the bond that he had posted, he'd posted a 500-pound bond, which was everything he had in the world, including all his land. He posted this bond, and they came to collect it.
Oh my gosh.
Which would have made him totally destitute. And so he petitioned the legislature to try to excuse him from having to pay everything to the government for not having showed up at this trial when he knew he wasn't. So he not only proved he wasn't guilty, but why he had to show up, why all this had happened. So it was really an incredible petition, and then he adds all these affidavits to it where everybody is testifying to the truth of what he is saying. And at the very top of the memorial, it's noted what the legislature did with it, which was an incredibly Solomonic decision, I think. The legislature decreed that they couldn't forgive the bond. I mean, if you did, nobody would show up for trial.
Right.
So they couldn't forgive the bond, but they would not collect it until after he and his wife died.
Oh, that was fair.
I thought so.
And it's amazing when you go through these records. A lot of these bonds, you just shake your head at where in the world did they come up with the amounts of money that they had to post. I did some work on some guardianships where it was $2,500 for 3 girls. So each for 3 girls that had to come up. The whole estate wasn't even worth that. So, so what advice do you have for people just getting started? It's one of those things that, how do you approach it?
Well, I got started the wrong way. I mean, what I received not only include these documents I was talking about, but lots of photocopies of family histories that described the ancestry of various lines of the family. And I thought that was the way you do genealogy, and so I started collecting family histories and trying to get the family history on every line. And I was working with these secondary sources to try to get back to the immigrants that I really wanted to identify because I thought they were the most important thing. That was the way I did it. And I didn't talk to anybody about this except my mother-in-law, who'd never done any research in her life. She was a great historian. I mean, she loved history, but she wasn't a researcher. So I didn't know the proper way of doing it. I didn't distinguish between, you could tell when you read books what kind of a record they were referring to, and when they were, usually you could tell they were referring to a record. And some of the books were good and some of them weren't. And I finally, when I learned that some of them were just totally off base, then I started looking more carefully at documents and how you need to document things. And I started going through this big genealogy that I had and trying to verify all of the, validate all the information, which I hadn't done before that. And I wish I'd done that sooner.
I got started, my grandfather's oldest sister, wrote a little booklet about the family. And of course, I knew nothing about genealogy. And other than when I read through the book, I knew there was information that wasn't correct. She had the wrong year that my grandmother died. She had the wrong year for my parents' wedding and a number of other things. So I did start trying to look for, but what I first started out doing was I put everything out. I knew nothing about Pedigree Chart or family group sheet. So I took the information out of the book, put it on an index card, and when I wanted to figure out who was who, I spread them out first on the dining room table, and then that got, as it grew, that got too big. So then it was the floor in the living room, and eventually it's like, well, I've got to go, and so that's when I finally went and took my first class.
Well, the pedigree charts I knew about, but I didn't know about the documents. I didn't know the categories of documents even that you ought to be able to look at. It wasn't until I moved here to the DC area that somebody told me, why don't you go to the Mount Vernon Genealogical Society and hear some lectures? And so I did, and I was really, it was a real educational experience from then on, talking to other genealogists and hearing lectures and learning the way genealogists are supposed to do things.
Yeah, I think the genealogical societies, wherever you live, are well worth going to, because first of all, you run into people who are interested in the same thing. And so you learn from what they've done. And sometimes you actually learn about people that are interested in the same region or area, or maybe you meet a cousin. It's all possible.
Even if they're not cousins, I have found universally that all the genealogists that I meet, they're interesting, they're intelligent, and they're nice. They're just nice people.
Well, now you took one of those books that you were given, and you rewrote the book, right?
Yes, one of the things that was in this box was a 64-page manuscript that was written in 1904 by a retired New York lawyer that was a cousin of an ancestor, we once removed from our ancestry, collateral. And he'd written this genealogy, taking his family all the way back to Elder Brewster of the Mayflower. And he'd spent a lot of time on it. Because he was a lawyer, his manuscript had citations for everything. It was an incredible manuscript. And I had 2 handwritten copies of it. And I decided that they really need to be shared. And so what I did was I transcribed it all, the whole book. I transcribed it, and I put footnotes in it of my own. I transcribed it in one font, and then because he'd made some mistakes, and there had been new things that had been discovered after he wrote his manuscript, I added those in a modern font, so that there was additional information in the book, other than in addition to what he wrote. So his manuscript stayed intact, but it had additions and corrections added to it.
So those are wonderful, but how did you share that? Because that's the important thing. I think people have these documents, or they have done the work, but they don't share it. They don't leave it in a library. You've done something. It looks like it's got a library code on it.
Yes. I took it down to the Library of Congress, and if you give them 2 copies, they will give you a Library of Congress number. So it's now in the Library of Congress. I also gave copies to everybody in my family for Christmas. So it went out both ways.
Oh, that's great.
But the other thing that I did was I took the 2 manuscripts that I had, of the original manuscripts, and I donated one to the New England Historical and Genealogical Society and one to the Mayflower Society, so that the copies would be there for other people to look at who were interested in the originals.
Were there a lot of errors in that original document, or was it just not documented?
Well, actually, it was pretty well documented. It was amazing how well documented it was. Yeah, he had very good documentation. But the information that was available had changed since 1904. There was one very serious mistake he made, and that was that he didn't descend from Elder Brewster.
It's pretty basic.
It is, yes. But what happened was very understandable. Matter of fact, at that point, there was a Brewster genealogy that verified what he said. But after that, another 30 years after that, the head of the Mayflower Descendant Journal decided to do some proving of Elder Brewster's descendants. And Elder Brewster's granddaughter was one of 3 wives of Jonathan Sparrow, who is one of our ancestors. And she was the middle wife. And none of the wives have any death dates or any marriage dates. And so you really couldn't tell which children belonged to which marriage. But what happened was the editor of the Mayflower Descendant went into the deeds, the local deeds, and he found that the father of the first wife had deeded a piece of property to all of his grandchildren jointly without naming them.
Oh.
And he found all of the quitclaim deeds that tried to put the land back together so that it could be sold. And our ancestor was one of those quitclaim deeds, which proved he was descended from Edward Bangs and not from Elder Brewster.
And that underscores the genealogical proof standard that you've got to have multiple pieces of information to prove one fact.
But the other thing I've really learned is that you've got to be willing to accept new information and not think that you have everything that there is, even if you've tried your best to find everything that there is.
Yeah.
Be willing to accept that something else can come out that can totally change your opinion.
This is very interesting, Linda. We could sit here another half hour, but unfortunately our time is up. But thank you for coming in and sharing with us. You know, I think Janelle and I have had some similar experiences. And you wanted to
I'd like
mention...
to invite our viewers to come to the Mount Vernon Genealogical Society meetings. We have them every 3rd Tuesday at the Holland Hall Center on Shenandoah Road in Alexandria. Come, be a visitor, learn what we have to offer, and we hope that you will continue to come and become a member.